Welcome to this explosive debate on a topic that's got everyone talking. Is the FDA poisoning people with the food we eat? In one corner, we have Adam, a seasoned FDA regulatory scientist with 20 years of experience ensuring food safety standards. In the other, Mary, a leading expert in human biology and nutrition, known for her research on dietary impacts and her skepticism of regulatory systems. Buckle up, this is going to be a clash of science, policy, and public trust. Let's get started.
Let's dive in. Adam, you claim the FDA standards are science-based and rigorous. Mary, you argue they're not enough. Adam, start us off. How does the FDA ensure food is safe?
The FDA's food safety framework is built on decades of peer-reviewed science. Take pesticides, a common target of criticism. We set maximum residue limits, MRLs, based on toxicological studies that assess both acute and chronic risks. For example, the EPA, which we work closely with, conducts risk assessments on pesticides like glyphosate, ensuring that residues in food are thousands of times below levels that could cause harm. Our 2022 Total Diet study found 99.8% of samples met safety standards. For food additives, like aspartame, we require extensive testing, animal studies, human trials, and long-term monitoring before approval. The acceptable daily intake, ADI, for aspartame is 50 mg per kilogram body weight based on data showing no adverse effects below this level. We also have the Food Safety Modernization Act, FSMA, which mandates preventive controls across the supply chain. If there's a real risk, we issue recalls over 1,000 in 2023 alone. The idea that we're letting poison slip through is absurd when you look at the data.
Adam, your numbers sound impressive, but they hide cracks in the system. Let's talk glyphosate. The EPA and FDA rely on industry-funded studies, like those from Monsanto, to set those MRLs. Independent research, like a 2017 study in environmental health, linked chronic glyphosate exposure to liver damage in rats at levels below the FDA's safe threshold. Human studies, like one from UC San Diego in 2019, found glyphosate in 80% of urine samples, showing widespread exposure. You can't just wave 99.8% compliance and call it safe when the long-term effects of low-dose exposure aren't fully studied. And aspartame? A 2020 meta-analysis in Nutrients showed correlations with metabolic syndrome in humans at doses below the ADI. The FDA's reliance on outdated toxicology models ignores how these chemicals interact with our microbiome or endocrine systems. You're not poisoning us intentionally, but your standards are too lax for chronic risks.
Mary, you're cherry-picking studies to fit a narrative. The FDA doesn't just rubber-stamp industry data. We review thousands of studies, including independent ones. Glyphosate's safety is backed by the National Academy of Sciences and WHO, which found no evidence of harm at typical exposure levels. Your 2017 rat study used doses far higher than human exposure, equivalent to eating 10 pounds of sprayed produce daily. As for aspartame, the 2020 meta-analysis you cited had small sample sizes and didn't control for confounders like lifestyle. Our ADI is based on over 100 studies, including human trials showing no metabolic effects at realistic doses. And the microbiome? We're funding research into that, but there's no conclusive evidence linking approved additives to harm via gut changes. You're speculating about risks without solid data.
Speculating? Adam, the FDA's solid data often lags behind emerging science. Your toxicology models assume linear dose-response curves, but endocrine disruptors like BPA or pesticides can have nonlinear effects, harmful at low doses in ways you don't test for. A 2018 study in endocrinology showed BPA alters insulin sensitivity at levels 100 times below the FDA's safe limit. And let's not ignore conflicts of interest. The FDA's revolving door with Big Food and Big AG executives moving between industry and regulation raises questions about bias. You recall 1,000 products a year, but how many harmful substances are approved for decades before you act, like trans fats, which the FDA allowed until 2018 despite evidence of heart disease risk since the 1990s?
Conflicts of interest? That's a tired trope. The FDA scientists are held to strict ethical standards with disclosure requirements and independent peer review. Trans fats were phased out as soon as the science was clear. Decades of data showed a small risk, but we acted when randomized controlled trials confirmed it. EPA? We've lowered exposure limits based on new studies, and our 2014 assessment found current levels in food packaging are safe. You're right that science evolves, but we don't ban substances on speculation. We need reproducible evidence, not single studies or anecdotes. If you have data showing widespread harm from approved additives, bring it. Otherwise, you're just fueling paranoia. Mary, you mentioned public paranoia as a response to FDA shortcomings. Adam, you call it fearmongering. Let's unpack this. Mary, why do you think people distrust the FDA?
People aren't stupid. They sense when a system isn't fully transparent. The FDA's funding partly comes from user fees paid by the food and drug industries, $1.1 billion in 2023 alone. That creates a perception of coziness, even if it's not direct corruption. Then you have cases like PFAS, forever chemicals, in food packaging. A 2021 study in Environmental Science and Technology found PFAS in fast food wrappers at levels linked to cancer and immune issues. The FDA knew about PFAS risks for years, but dragged its feet until public pressure forced action. Or take artificial food dyes like Red 40. Studies, like one in The Lancet 2007, linked them to hyperactivity in kids, yet they're still in our food. People see these delays and think, if the FDA is so rigorous, why do we keep finding out about risks after the fact? That's not paranoia. It's a rational response to a system that seems reactive, not proactive.
Perception isn't reality, Mary. User fees fund faster reviews, not decisions. Our approvals are based on science, not who pays the bills. PFAS? We banned several types in food packaging by 2020, based on emerging data. Red 40? The Lancet study showed weak correlations, and subsequent reviews by the European Food Safety Authority found no consistent evidence of harm at current levels. We can't ban every substance based on one study. Otherwise, we'd have no food left on shelves. Public distrust comes from misinformation amplified by social media, not FDA failures. Take the glyphosate causes cancer scare. The WHO's IARC classified it as a probable carcinogen in 2015, but their own data showed no risk at dietary levels. Yet conspiracy theories exploded online, ignoring the science. We're fighting an uphill battle against fear, not facts.
You're dismissing public concern as misinformation, but that's patronizing. People aren't just reacting to TikTok conspiracies, they're looking at history. The FDA approved saccharin in the 1970s despite animal studies showing cancer risks, only to backtrack later. Same with Vioxx, a drug pulled after causing thousands of heart attacks. These aren't isolated cases, they erode trust. And when you say no risk at dietary levels, you're ignoring cumulative exposure. We're not eating one pesticide or one dye. We're consuming dozens of chemicals daily, and the FDA doesn't test for their combined effects. A 2019 study in Nature showed synergistic effects of pesticide mixtures on gut health. Why isn't the FDA studying this? People feel like guinea pigs because the system prioritizes safe enough over truly safe.
Cumulative effects are a valid concern, and we're not ignoring them. The FDA's Cumulative Risk Assessment Program models multiple pesticide exposures, and our 2022 report found no significant risk at current levels. Testing every possible chemical combination is impractical. There are millions of potential interactions. We prioritize based on exposure data and biological plausibility. Saccharin? Early studies were flawed, using doses equivalent to drinking 800 sodas a day. When better data emerged, we adjusted. Vioxx is a drug, not food, and irrelevant here. The FDA isn't perfect, but we're not reckless. You're painting a picture of systemic failure when the reality is a system constantly refining itself based on new evidence. Public fear often outpaces the science, and that's where you're not helping Mary, amplifying doubts without offering solutions.
Solutions? How about stricter pre-market testing for additives, independent of industry funding? or banning substances with any evidence of harm until long-term studies clear them. The FDA's refining often takes decades, leaving consumers exposed. People aren't irrational for questioning a system that approved high-fructose corn syrup, which a 2010 American Journal of Clinical Nutrition study linked to obesity and diabetes spikes. You call it fear, I call it holding you accountable.